dealing with larger organizations, licensing does not live in a vacuum. It's rare that some entity truly owns licensing and entitlements within an organization. If you get the pricing and the monetization stack wrong, you could very well run out of money. Usage metering is becoming very prevalent.
Welcome to the Monetization Engineering Podcast. My name is Akhil. I am the co-founder and COO at Monetizely, where we help B2B software companies figure out their pricing strategy, especially in this new era where AI is changing the economics of software. For the last decade, SaaS monetization was quite simple. Per seat, per month, your cost to serve the 500 first users, assuming you have 500 users, was basically zero. You could set a price, start sending an invoice, and simply move on. That world is gone. Today, if you are building an AI powered product, every user interaction has real costs: tokens, computes, AI, API calls, and whatnot. Your most engaged customer might be your least profitable. And your billing infrastructure, it probably was not built for this. That is what this podcast is all about. We are talking to the people building the infrastructure, implementing the systems, and solving the hard problems of monetization in the AI era. This is not high level strategy stuff, the real engineering and architecture of how software companies turn usage into revenue. Today's guest is Edmon Moren. Edmon is the CEO and co founder of License Spring, a software licensing and entitlements platform which is used by companies across life sciences, aerospace, gaming, and a lot of critical infrastructure. Before License Spring, Edmon co founded PDF Pro Softwares, which has sold over 1 million copies. From what I have researched, he built License Spring to solve his own problem and then discovered just how deep the licensing rabbit hole goes. So, Edmund, welcome to the show.
Akil, thanks for having me.
Awesome, awesome. Very excited. I have some questions in my mind, but again, we'll try to have this free flowing. So, before we dive in, I want to give you some context on why I'm personally excited about this conversation. At Monetizely, we do pricing strategy, packaging, positioning, the whole thing, and we're good at it. We can deliver a strategy that is rigorously tested, that will objectively improve revenue, increase net retention, the whole 9 yards. But here's what we have learned the hard way: a great pricing strategy on paper means absolutely nothing if it can't actually be implemented. And the thing that kills implementation more often than anything else is lack of entitlements. The systems simply can't handle it. Now, you design a beautiful usage based tier or a feature gated package, and then after you have done all the work, you find out that the licensing system is hard coded, or the billing system just does not talk to the product, or there is no way to force limits without a whole 6 month engineering project. So we've made it a point to understand the systems layer, entitlements, metering, billing, so that when we deliver a strategy, we know it's actually implementable. Which is why, again, I wanted to talk to you. You have been in the entitlements piece of this stack, and that's often where strategies go to die. So, Edmund, License Spring came out of a real problem that you had. You were distributing your PDF Pro software and needed a way to manage licenses. My guess is you looked at what was out there, and correct me if I'm wrong, and decided that whatever was existing was not good enough, and you then decided to build your own. Let's go back to that moment and see what did you see in the market that made you say we will have to build this ourselves.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Akil. And I'd be happy to jump into a little bit of the history of the inception of License Spring, as well as how we started off with PDF Pro, because it's actually, I think, really relevant and pertinent to the conversation around the evolution of the complexity and sophistication of entitlements. Because we've seen that arc ourselves with this internal project around PDF Pro. So I'll get started with that. PDF Pro is a software title that initially we were selling in 2011, which we didn't develop ourselves, in fact. At the time, we were a small organization that was digital marketing agency. We
Mm-hmm.
managed to get a white label deal out the door with a company that essentially allowed us to brand their PDF editor. And so, our bread and butter at the time was to build websites, advertise for them, and it was, essentially a kind of, I guess, arbitrage, if you will, between the acquisition costs and the royalty fees and and essentially the revenue that you could generate from that. Uh, Pretty easy, pretty straightforward model, right? Like it was basically we were selling license keys. They would get node locked to a device. That was a very simple entitlement
Mm-hmm.
where you
Yes.
essentially have to bind, a perpetual license with maybe something like a maintenance period to a specific machine. There's no named user. There's no concept of a seat. Uh, and it worked pretty well. I mean, there wasn't a whole lot of competition back in the day when it came to pay-per-click advertising. Of course, the whole world's changed now.
Mm-hmm.
Now there's, countless competitors. The cost per click is, you know, 10 times, maybe 20 times higher what it was back
Yes.
then. Uh, and also very interestingly, I would say that model largely died mostly because it wasn't able to sufficiently monetize on the original business model. So what I mean by that is, we were selling perpetual licenses for $30 like that was essentially the lifetime fee.
Mm-hmm.
There were no device transfers allowed. And what we saw at the time, well, I mean, a few years later, maybe, come 2015, 2016, was a whole slew of companies, including Adobe, by the way, who could easily outbid us
Yes.
on search campaigns, specifically because they all moved to recurring billing models. So with the compounding billing, essentially, we simply were losing our audience. We weren't able to acquire new customers as a result. So that kind of led us to a point where we were talking to the vendor that we were that we had a white label deal with. They weren't really maintaining the software, so we kind of had to make a choice at that point whether to continue the project and maybe build something in-house versus just slowly let the that business die and kind of move on to something else, right? Uh, we decided to rebuild PDF Pro from the ground up at that time. This is around 2015. And one of the big pain points that we had with the white label deal was actually the entitlements management, the license key generator. It wasn't very well built. I think it was a homegrown project within that organization. Uh, we'd sometimes get duplicate keys. The hardware identifier, the device fingerprinting, didn't work so well. It wasn't necessarily unique. It wasn't necessarily persistent. So it was causing a lot
Mm-hmm.
of support requests. And it was really from that we decided to do some research to see what exists on in the market at the time. There were a few legacy vendors, that were prohibitively expensive, and their tech stack was maybe 10, 20, even sometimes older than that. Very difficult to implement. Pricing per revenue, I would say, and then there was, a few startups that existed, which, frankly, at that time, it would have been a very difficult sell for us to go with to adopt a company that might not be around for a few years. So
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of why we decided to build an in-house licensing solution. And that was really how we got started. It eventually spun off to its own organization. Now we focus on a very different type of target market. Like you mentioned, it's more enterprise based at this point. But we definitely had to learn a whole lot along the way. So
There is an assumption that entitlements, because see, this has been a thing for a very long time, is a solved problem. Where do you think this assumption goes wrong? Where are the hidden complexities that people do not think about when they start, or are not aware of even when they have built a little?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. From our perspective, there's maybe two things that come to mind. One is actually thinking of customers that do require an offline implementation of the entitlements of a SaaS product. So I'll give an example. So typically, a company will offer some form of AI. It usually needs some type of model, and it gets delivered online through a browser. And that will be maybe 90 or 95 or even 99% of their customer base will use the service online. Then they'll come across potentially a very large, lucrative contract with an enterprise customer that says you can't access our data to train, everything needs to be on-prem.
Hmm.
So in that case, the delivery of the service needs to happen on-prem. It needs to happen locally without access to the internet. And although in terms of the customer count, it might be very low or not very high in terms of the customer base, the revenue could be significant. Oftentimes it can be, 40 to 50% of the company's revenue. So
That's true.
that is something certainly to consider. The other thing that we're also finding to be true is, and I don't think it's a fully solved problem or it's not something that's fully standardized in the industry, it has to do with indirect sales.
Hmm.
So what I mean by that is software typically gets, well, at least traditionally, it's been sold directly from the vendor to the customer. Uh, but there are also a lot of channel partners and
Hmm.
indirect sales through distributors, through resellers. Uh, if you think of Microsoft, a big part of their business today still comes through MSPs as an
MSPs, yes.
example. When you're dealing with SaaS products, when you're dealing with consumption-based models, uh, there isn't really, I'd say today, a very good solution for delivering through indirect sales, through distributors.
Hmm.
There are some solutions where, maybe the commission structure might be 2 or 3 years, and then afterwards, the vendor just takes everything. But uh, typically, right now, SaaS is delivered directly from vendor to customer, and I'm sure that'll change in the upcoming years.
Yes. Interesting. Interesting. Awesome. And interesting. When you say, again, it won't be possible to go into most of the learnings, but if you can give us a highlight of what were the top three things that you had to learn along the way, what would those be?
From license spring, you mean?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, well, first of all, uh, I was surprised just how many edge cases there were.
Hmm.
So when we first got started, License Spring was a free service that
Hmm.
we just made available to the general public to see who would be interested in it. Uh, and you would get someone who wrote a plugin for some software and they
Hmm.
were using C++. Plus plus. Someone else who built a standalone application for uh, some sort of sensor in a lab, for instance, and it's
Hmm.
using a different programming language. Some SaaS companies, some audio compression tools, and it was really just kind of learning from all these different use cases that you realize that it's actually it's not just a simple product that really is able to be used by a lot of different types of use cases, or organizations, or scenarios. You really have to cover a lot of different edge cases before uh, I'd say before you're able to penetrate a wide part of the market. So yeah, I guess to answer your question, a big learning was just how flexible a product needs to be before it's something that can become general purpose.
Understandable. Again, so from what I gather, PDF Pro was B2C. is B2C and the user is a buyer. When, and you were just said B2B vendors started coming to you, uh, how did you see complexity changing? What do what is it that they needed that you had not anticipated? Again, I think what I'm asking is, you mentioned edge cases. Can we maybe deep dive into a little bit into that? How does the requirement for a B2B enterprise vary from a B2C one for which you had originally built the product?
Well, so I find when we're initially talking with smaller vendors, it was a little more straightforward in the sense that, they would be willing to dive into the documentation, read the code samples, and, a lot of the things that we were doing, which were pretty self-serve, uh, was actually landing. It was pretty effective to get people to start using License
Mm-hmm.
Spring. Their main goal was to get some sort of mechanism that worked that allowed them to uh, implement entitlements into their products, and then from that, maybe tie it into some sort of tool so that they can charge for those entitlements. So, maybe issue a license or assign a named user to a license, and these sorts of things. And then, of course, handle situations like offline scenarios where, maybe there's no access to the internet. So in order to check licenses, uh, there might need to be some local cache or some mechanism to handle that scenario.
Mm,
When dealing with large organizations, you realize that licensing does not live in a vacuum. It's
mm,
not something that there's just one small team and they own it and they can make all sorts of decisions and they have full autonomy around these choices. It involves the engineering team, it involves the billing team, it involves the security team, the compliance team, and it really sort of sits on the periphery of many different roles and responsibilities within a large organization. And I think that's where a big part of the challenge comes from. It's that it's rare that some person or some entity truly owns licensing and entitlements within an organization. That's not always the case. There are some companies that do have that sophistication, but generally that's not the case.
interesting. Interesting. Again, since you were saying this, and I had a similar question for in my mind for later, but I'll ask it now. Who do you think should be owning this in a let's say I am a growing business, and entitlements is a key part of my stack. Who
Mhm.
ideally should be owning it?
I think it depends on the kind of organization you're in.
Okay.
So what I mean by that is there are some companies where good enough is fine. Like you can think of, I mean, if you look at the trajectory of companies like OpenAI, for instance, it's not how they gated it and productized it that drove the adoption. You know, it's the quality of the product and whatever they put on top of it is good enough, right? That's not really the thing that matters the most. You have other types of organizations, however, where if you get the pricing and the monetization stack wrong, you could very well run out of money. This is very relevant in AI, as you mentioned in your introduction. There are costs to operating a lot of these types of services, and this is very much why usage metering is becoming very prevalent in this day and age because 5, 10 years ago, adding a new customer or adding 100 customers or 1,000 customers had negligible impact on infrastructure costs. Whereas today, that simply isn't the case. Some
Hmm.
customers will cost 10x the average, for instance. So there needs to be some form of reconciliation. So to answer your question, I mean, I think it is part of the product team typically that I would say should be owning this because I'd say it's maybe 60, 70% business logic and then, maybe 30, 40% engineering decisions that need to be made. And typically I think, with a competent product team, that's where it would sit. So it's the people who decide what types of tiers should exist, what the product offering should be, and they should be owning how that gets implemented and enforced in the applications.
Makes sense, makes sense. And we actually agree. Again, this question is very adjacent to who owns pricing strategy. And again,
Hmm.
the rubric to understand that is very, very similar. Perfect, perfect. Moving on. So again, let's talk about where license spring actually sits in the stack. So we have the monetization stack, we have entitlements, metering, pricing, billing, revenue recognition. You are fundamentally in the entitlements area. You are basically answering to, is this user allowed to do X or not? This is again a kind of oversimplified but summarization. How do you think about the boundary between what you solve and what is someone else's problem? What is something that license spring or the entitlements team does not own, and what is in your gamut?
Well, so License Spring, first of all, I'd say the main part that we're involved in is we are pretty deeply ingrained into the products that use us. So we do have a whole suite of tools, SDKs, APIs that allow people to configure the state of their products, of their applications according to the entitlements granted, whatever what was sold, and so on. So on the first part of your question, I'd say we kind of sit in the maybe a management or configuration layer on top of or inside of the application. And then, as I mentioned before, entitlements doesn't live in a vacuum. It is very important to have integrations with billing, with payments, with CRM. So we're kind of, I'd say, at a bridge or at a crossroads between multiple different roles or departments within the organization.
Makes sense, makes sense. But again, as you said, I want to dig a little deeper into this. As you said, that you have to talk to the billing system because they know what was actually sold. Maybe the CRM system to, sometimes that is where this information lives. The fundamental idea is there has to be a source of truth which tells you what has been sold. Could be the billing system, could be the CRM system, could be an entirely different system, and other things that you need to do. Is there, is the boundary between what all you are willing to do in your domain a strict boundary or a fuzzy boundary? As in, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but let's say, if the central source of truth does not exist, are you willing to be that central source of truth, or you have to strictly be requiring this new central source of truth?
Hmm. Yeah, and that's a good question. Again, it is a little dependent on the organizations of the companies that we work with. Uh, some companies are perfectly fine having all of the entitlements and essentially having license spring act as the source of truth for keeping track of which customer has which license, which user consumed which credit. So that's sort of an organizational decision. We primarily provide the tools.
Mm-hmm.
Other companies don't want, say, their BDR or their sales team or customer support necessarily logging into License Spring because they already have their own ERP systems, they have their own CRM. So we typically, in those cases, we use our bi-directional integration so that we sync the data between License Spring and these other systems. So yeah, it's a little dependent on the company that we work with.
Got it. Got it. This is helpful. Again, what I have realized is, this conversation has now become me learning a lot more about these, how these work. Again, I believe that was always the idea, but now my curiosity is taking over. So again, in the same lines, out of my curiosity, so I am sure you support a lot of licensing models. So things like from perpetual subscription, consumption based, floating, user based, whatnot. So when a customer comes to you, how do they decide which model fits? And when I again, some people would always know what they want, some people would have a notion of what they want. So what do you, the fundamental question is, what do you see your customers getting wrong? So, and what is it that they should be cognizant of when thinking about licensing models so that they do not get it wrong?
Well, I think that's a really good question. I mean, I think in terms of what we see with, mistakes that are made, there's maybe a few that do come to mind. One is perhaps something that's not particularly well thought out initially. So these are usually customers that might have had a first stab at implementing something that they built in-house. It usually means hard-coded feature gates, for example. It might mean, they were launching a product, for instance, and they had maybe 2 months to go, and this was they sort of realized sort of towards very close to the deadline that this is maybe an important stack, and the project will fall on the lap of some poor engineers that cobble together some sort of solution at that point, right?
Been there, done that.
Uh, yeah, and like these sorts of decisions tend to build a lot of technical debt within these companies, and usually the can gets kicked down the road to a point where they either decide to either reiterate and redo a lot of this in-house, or maybe do some research and see what other vendors might be able to solve for this problem. So kind of not putting too much thought into it. That's maybe one thing that does come up often. Another thing that might happen, it's not too much of a problem, but it does come up from time to time where people overcorrect, let's say,
Hmm.
where they have a product they need to launch. The business team has all these ideas on the different tiers they want to create, and uh, sometimes, I mean, again, it kind of depends on what the goal is for the product launch. Because if you're looking for adoption, maybe over engineering and adding way too much thought into this is a little premature, I would say.
Sure, sure.
Um, then there's, some mistakes perhaps around scaling as well. So this kind of gets back to, let's say, the first point where uh, if you are implementing something that is meant to be consumed by thousands or millions of users,
Mm-hmm.
you will start hitting a lot of problems around, maybe the idempotency problem where, you're not counting uh, accurately your consumptions. Or maybe the server response for the entitlements is slow. These sorts of things tend to creep up. It tends to be, let's say, quote unquote, good problems to solve because that means you do have a lot of adoption.
Yes, yes.
Uh, and it's not necessarily something you think of when you're just setting it and forgetting it as, sort of an afterthought, let's say. So those are a few of the mistakes or problems that come to mind.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Now, I would want to dig a little deeper into this, and I want to go a little tactical. So here's the thing, right? Let's say I am a new startup. I am seed stage, maybe Series A, right? I'm still kind of, maybe I have PMF, maybe I do not. But I want to get this right, but I do not want this to become a big deal, right? Because my priority is to sell. I want to bring
Hmm.
the product out there. I want to do this. So my time horizon will be, let me do this good enough that it lasts me for, let's say, 2 years, and then once I am somewhere near a series B, okay, then I'll try to redo this if needed. How does one think about this? I understand that you shared what are the mistakes that people made, but I want to go a little more tactical. If I were to come to you today, I'm a series A or a seed stage company. I want to, my ask is, Edmund, please help me. implement something which is good enough for 2 years. I do not want perfect. I want something which I will do, forget, and then I can revisit in maybe 2 to 3 years. How should I
Hmm.
go about doing that? And then we'll get into when I am scaling, how should I go about that as well?
Hmm. Well, I think it really starts with what your goals are.
Hmm.
At the end of the day, if you have a product you're going to launch, maybe you have secured some funding, um, then you have to ask yourself, are you looking to drive revenue? Are you looking to grow your user base? Uh, are you looking to potentially discriminate against certain types of users to focus on other types of users?
Interesting.
Uh, and I think these goals are really uh, the part that you need to start with. Because based on that, then you can create strategies around pricing, and from that, you can design or architect a stack for the entitlements in order to enforce them. Um, that's maybe the framework that I'd be using. License spring typically, I mean, our goal is to be as flexible as possible. So regardless of the business model you're looking to implement, you'd be able to use us with that. And we're not so much of an advisor or consultancy, but we
Mm-hmm.
have seen a lot of different companies. So we kind of share what other people do. Uh, Now, with that in mind, that's the other thing. The customer usually has some under like they usually have some preferences around how they like to consume products.
Hmm.
So you don't necessarily it's not necessarily a bad idea to uh, create a different type of model around how you charge and how you license your software because that can be a point of difference. But it is important uh, to be able to convey and communicate how your pricing and how your licensing works. If that's a point of friction, that can turn a lot of people off. And I'd also add that, a lot of most customers want some form of understanding of pricing and they don't like change too much, let's
Hmm.
say.
Hmm. Hmm.
So this is a bit of a challenge in this day and age because I think when it comes to a lot of new startups, they're still trying to figure out what works. So there does need to be some experimentation. But most end users don't actually like a whole lot of iteration and price changes and having to understand this. Once they sign a contract in year one, they don't want to have to consider a completely different business model in year two, for instance.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Actually, that aligns very well with how we think about pricing strategy or pricing model. The fundamental always is that pricing is a reflection of the current stage and goal of the organization. As you very rightfully said, what are you pricing for? Are you pricing for revenue? Are you pricing for growth? Are you pricing for competition? And then that defines how you build your pricing structure, and then that rolls down to how eventually uh, entitlements are done. So again, this was already very complex, and then AI came along and then simply added a new layer. So let's talk about how that is changing things. A lot of consumption based licensing needs to be done in AI. I think I'm starting a little deeper into it, but I think this is important, where you are tracking usage and then enforcing limits. Okay, this kind of, it feels like it is overlapping with metering. Okay, how do you think about the line, the difference between tracking usage for access control and then tracking usage for billing? Because now I need both.
Hmm.
So how do you think about the line between this, the the seeming overlap between entitlements and metering?
Yeah, well, I think that's a good question. I mean, I think that line is pretty blurred actually, because I'd say the metering component can be a subset of the entitlements, and I'll explain what I mean by that. So
Hmm.
when it comes to what is credit-based billing or outcome-based billing or consumptions or usage metering, it's a counter ultimately, and then depending on that counter, you decide how to bill or how much is allowed. And from that, I mean, you can go from the simplest where it's just allow X number of API calls, for
Hmm.
instance, and then if they want more, then they have to pay more, for instance.
Hmm.
You can put certain gates around that where maybe it's some allowance that gets periodically reset. Perhaps maybe once a
Sure.
day you can consume a certain number. I mean, I know that's how Gemini does it, for instance. You can use their model a certain number of times and then it resets periodically. You can implement soft limits, you can implement hard limits. So soft limit might mean that you accept overages and maybe bill after the fact. Another common model would be something like a credit burn down, where someone prepays for a certain amount and then they top up every time that they want to they want to use more, for instance, or when they run out of credits. When it comes to metering, I mean, it usually adds additional flexibility in that, it's more of I'd say a fire hose approach where you're just counting or, you're counting events, if you will, and then
Hmm.
from that you're determining how many credits should be uh should that count for. So for instance, if there's I don't know, some event, let's say it's an image generation from AI that gets sent and it gets recorded. That might get mapped to a certain number of credits. Let's say it's 5 credits. The same system might be counting, let's say, videos generated. Maybe that takes
Hmm.
25 credits. And then, the meter is essentially counting those events. And then the credit-based billing system is something that sits on top of it and kind of maps those events to specific credits. So these two do work hand in hand. Like you can't really have a sophisticated credit system without usage metering.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Again, following, going a little deeper, entitlements are basically about enforcement. Okay. Making sure users are not able to do things they have not paid for. Now, in AI products, that enforcement might need to happen in near real time, right?
Mhm.
Potentially sometimes mid request. How do you handle for that level of dynamicity?
Well, one of the big challenges is the fact that these the tokens are essentially what you're counting could be billions or sometimes trillions of different credits, right? So it's a very large number of actions that you're looking to record and you're looking to set up some enforcement mechanism around. Uh, Typically at that scale, the way that you would do it is you would ingest the events. There would be some system on the backend server that then counts the credits and then will notify the application through some sort of webhook when the quota is reached, so that you stop the operation of the application until more credits are added. So that's typically how it's handled. If you're doing more, let's say, outcome based or maybe something that's much lower volume, you might still hit some scalability issues, but this logic can also be handled locally within the application.
Interesting, interesting. But let us stick to the high volume thing. So I use Claude. I use Claude a lot, and the way they have enforced entitlements is something that I personally like. As I am using, let's say I'm using Claude Code and my desktop application together. Now these are two areas through which my usage is coming, whatever it is, token or whatever, and it is in real time it is giving me alerts as to you have already consumed 90% of your limit, and then as soon as I hit my token limit, it stops in the middle of the processing. So it will be in the process of generating an output and it immediately stops. So basically, the capturing of usage and the enforcement of entitlements is happening in near real time. How, again, uh, I'm going a little into technical depth here. How do you handle that, and how complex or difficult is it for a consumer of license spring to be able to build something like that, assuming you handle that?
Yeah, well, so in that situation, it's kind of how I previously described it. So events would get sent to a service like License Spring, and then once the allowance is reached, the server will say allowance reached, and it's very simple APIs at that scale. So something like
Hmm.
Claude. Uh, the other way that, I mean, if you need more information from a server rather than allow or block usage, uh, you could use something like you sending the consumption data, so total consumptions to a service like License Spring, and then License Spring would send how much is remaining
Okay.
within the allocation. So you see both models.
Okay. That makes sense. I think that answers my question. And license spring is today equipped to handle this level of dynamicity and load. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean we do have AI companies that use us today.
Okay. Perfect. Perfect. This is good. This is helpful. So let's go back again into the abstract world of software licensing. What is something that is accepted wisdom in the software licensing world, something that everyone assumes is true but you think is actually wrong? What is your, again, hot take? What is a controversial opinion that you have?
Well, I think I did mention some of this earlier. I think most companies, at least in SaaS, it seems like there's a notion of, moving fast and breaking things.
Hmm.
And I do think that there is a bit of a collective mindset where this iteration to optimize business models is a good thing. I think that leaves the customer and the end user a little bit out of the picture.
Hmm.
So, my hot take is think more about the customer and, be mindful of changes. I think every change in entitlements and in tiers does have a cost.
Hmm.
And that's, something that I think a lot of organizations, or at least the ones that are looking to rapidly evolve, they're not necessarily particularly mindful of.
Actually makes sense. Makes sense. Again, I agree. So again, if a, let's say, now there are AI native companies and there are companies that have been in business for some time and they are now building their first AI powered feature. Let's say I have a pre-existing software and now I'm building my first AI powered feature, and I've not really thought about licensing and entitlement much. And I think this is some bit of this question we discussed earlier also. But what is the one thing that I should get right from day one? If I'm building my first
Mhm.
AI powered feature, what would you recommend me to absolutely get right on the day, first day?
Well, I think one thing that's really important is I think it's really important to put a lot of thought initially up front in terms of what types of gates and what types of credits you're looking to implement. Uh, it's changeable, but again, like as I said, I do think that there are drawbacks and there are trade-offs and costs associated with those changes. Uh, a lot of the discussion has to do with, or a lot of the decision has to do with, internal costs, for instance. So maybe leaving a sufficient buffer around what you charge for a credit and what the underlying cost associated with delivering that credit is something that does need, I'd say very, very sophisticated or, very in-depth research, and it is a very important decision to make. And that's probably something that Monetizely services would be well suited for.
Yes, yes, I appreciate you saying that, and and yet you're right. Getting it right at the strategy level, having clarity on what I should be use. I'm so sorry. What I should be using to meter is very important. For sure, it is nothing is set in stone. You can go ahead and make changes later, but you would rather not, because not only is there going to be rework, there is a possibility that you are leaving money on the table by charging for something which is not the optimal choice. This is again very much in line with our philosophy, and I appreciate. Thank you for mentioning us. One, so again, I come from a tech background. I was a CTO for a very long time. So when I see a challenge like this, right, and very much like you, my first instinct is to why not I build it myself. So I'm coming to the build versus buy question, the standard, the most important one. Build versus buy a licensing infrastructure like license spring. When does it make sense? Again, I understand, and everyone should buy license spring and get it done. But on the ground, when would it make sense for a company to actually build their own versus going to a provider like yours? Where is this line?
Hmm. Well, this makes me think of a book I read relatively recently, called The Art of Scalability. So it is maybe a little dated at this point, but I think a lot of the points are still relevant. There's a chapter that discusses this specifically around what parts of your stack you should build in-house versus what you should buy. And I pretty much agree with most of the premise, which is you build in-house what is your core competency,
Sure.
and you outsource everything that is not your core competency.
Hmm.
So most organizations will not see this abstraction layer of product configuration as a core competency.
Hmm.
So it does make sense to find a third-party vendor that fits well within your tech stack. Whether it's License Spring or another vendor, it kind of depends
Hmm.
on who you are. There are some companies, even very large ones, that still decide to build these things in-house because they do see this as, very important. There are some companies that, philosophically, they see more risk uh, using many third parties for a bunch of different stacks that all
Sure.
have to integrate together. So they just kind of want to own everything. And some are, maybe a little more political in nature in the sense of, what they decide to build and, what their turf within the organization is. But yeah, generally speaking, I think if you're looking to move fast, if you're looking for flexibility, if you're looking for a mature layer of extraction from a service that has been doing this with many different use cases, uh, it often makes sense to outsource this to a trusted partner.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Okay. Now, again, coming back, and this is something that I believe I should have asked earlier, but now let me ask this. Because of this, so historically, the monetization stack has been very fragmented, right? Entitlements are separate, metering separate, billing separate, CPQ, everything separate. But with the advent of AI and usage being a very key metric, key aspect that needs to be taken in mind, do you see a consolidation coming where entitlements, metering, billing all merges into one platform, or do you think the stack will remain fragmented as it has been for the past many years?
I certainly think there is a consolidation happening. I mean, you could just look at, maybe Stripe's acquisition calendar, let's say. I think a few years ago they bought Lemon Squeezy, which is,
Yes.
a merchant of record, which has its own licensing capability. They bought Metronome, which is,
Metronome.
RevOps, usage metering experts. So,
Yes.
uh, I do see there being some consolidation and, maybe to a certain extent, some standardization, right? But not every company is a SaaS and not every company will use Stripe. And some organizations already have, they're very entrenched in their own tech stack. So I think there will always be opportunities for platform agnostic services that are able to plug into, complex systems.
And where do you see License Spring in this becoming a larger platform versus or staying the king of entitlements?
Well, so one of our strengths, I would say, compared to maybe some of the newer players that focus exclusively on SaaS, is that we do handle offline entitlements quite well.
Hmm.
So SaaS is great if and it is a very popular medium for delivering, uh, usage of an application over the internet, over a browser, oftentimes, or maybe with an Electron app that is connected to it. Uh, a lot of the world economy doesn't is not a SaaS, in fact.
Yes.
Uh, there
Not
are
yet.
lots of yeah, not yet. There are a lot of physical products that do need some form of configuration or entitlements. Maybe they have some technology component. Uh, I mean, we work, for instance, with one of the major AR headset manufacturers that embedded us into their operating system,
Okay.
as an example, so that they can create different tiers or they can turn on and off functionality based on the sensors available in the equipment.
Hmm.
Uh, and yeah, I mean, if you look at industries like oil and gas or healthcare and med tech and very highly specialized, maybe CAD software, design software or even, automotive driving simulation software, which we have with some of our customers, oftentimes this uh, gets deployed in air-gapped and offline environments.
Hmm.
Uh, and you still need that level of configuration that lives locally or that gets cached that may or may not even get periodically synced with, the central hub that would act as at least the entitlement granting part of it.
Makes sense. Get it. Again, we would have talked about, from my research says that your supporting air gap applications is where License Spring truly excels. But again, uh, since again we try to stay in the realm of SaaS, but maybe some other time we'll talk about that. Uh, as we conclude, you have been building License Spring since I believe 2015. Looking back, what's the biggest lesson that you personally have learned about this space that you actually did not expect?
Biggest, yeah, I mean, I guess some of the learnings were just how complex it is and it
Hmm.
can be. Uh, how quickly it's evolving is also something that has surprised me. Um, yeah, and just how pervasive having a configuration layer within a SaaS product is. So
Awesome, awesome. Edmund, this was great. Absolutely. Thanks a lot for coming on.
for sure. Akil, thanks
And
for having me.
likewise. So, guys, that was Edmon Moren, CEO of Licensing. So, if you are building software and thinking about licensing or entitlements, do check them out at licensespring.com. This is the Monetization Engineering podcast. If you are dealing with pricing, packaging, or the systems that connect usage to revenue, that's what we do at Monetizely. You can find our details in the description below. Thank you for listening. See you the next time.